fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy praise. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus saw me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God, he to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above.
We're going to pick up a scripture reading today from Isaiah, actually, Isaiah 63. I've been really enjoying reading through the Psalms, and typically I will continue to include a psalm reading at the beginning of each session and then move into our teaching. But today I just wanted to read from there's a poem in Isaiah 63 that pertains to the text we'll be looking at in Exodus 14 and 15. So let me read Isaiah 63, short section, just starting in verse 7 and reading through verse 14. I will recount the steadfast love of the Lord, the praises of the Lord, according to all that the Lord has granted us, and the great goodness to the house of Israel that he has granted them, according to his compassion, according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he said, surely they are my people, children who will not deal falsely. And he became their Savior. In all their affliction he was afflicted, and the angel of his presence saved them. In his love and in his pity he redeemed them. He lifted them up and carried them all the days of old. But they rebelled and grieved his Holy Spirit. Therefore he turned to be their enemy, and himself fought against them. Then he remembered the days of old, of Moses and his people. Where is he who brought them up out of the sea with the shepherds of his flock? Where is he who put in the midst of them his Holy Spirit, who caused his glorious arm to go at the right hand of Moses, who divided the waters before them to make for himself an everlasting name, who led them through the depths? Like a horse in the desert, they did not stumble. Like livestock that go down into the valley, the Spirit of the Lord gave them rest. So you led your people to make for yourself a glorious name. We are going to just pick up and have a little discussion here about the scripture reading for this week. I realize there were many scripture readings for this week. What we're hoping to do is, and I hope this has turned out to be helpful. Again, as I said, I've been quite enjoying it. It's helpful for me to orient and just have something every day to read through. I'm not going to go into elaborate commentary on every section And here in our sessions together, I won't teach through each section of the reading as we did last week. I'm just going to pluck out one or two basic points of observation from usually one or two of the sections, and then I'm hoping to condense these teaching times down into shorter segments, and this will partly depend on everyone doing the reading for the week. So if you are getting the emails, try to do the reading as much as you can, and then Sunday we will sit down together and discuss just one or two of the sections and go through some of the main, most salient points and some of the things that are just coming across as most encouraging, most challenging, some of the things that I think we could use at the time. And it's been pretty remarkable, actually, to just sit down with the text day by day, read through these sections, the selections of the reading portions, and just see what the meaning, what meaning there is to extract, and how relevant and how important it is to be engaged with the text and the concepts and the ideas. And I've got a lot of encouragement from it. It's provided some opportunity to really be challenged. And so that's what I hope to bring out here as we go through this. Today, just want to look at basically the crossing of the Red Sea. So Exodus 14, this was a major section of the portions we read this week. And then chapter 15 we'll look at a little bit too, the Song of the Sea. We're going to read Exodus 14, verse 21 through 31. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land. And the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and upon their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled into it. The Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Of all the hosts of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So the actual crossing of the sea. We looked at the Passover. It's interesting here. A lot of the elements will sort of replay the plagues. Moses uses his staff, which he acquires with an encounter with Yahweh at the burning bush on Mount Sinai. He'll use that staff to go and then perform miracles, sort of functioning as the hand of Yahweh, the arm of Yahweh. Oftentimes you'll see the staff is in his hand, and he says, stretch out your hand. And the staff then is the sort of implement of exerting Yahweh's power. You see a sort of replay of that. Like, they've been saved from Egypt, right? The Passover brings them out at night, and they're free from Egypt. But there's a sense where they're not quite yet delivered. And so you'll see a sort of replay where the elements will be recapitulated. Moses will again stretch out his hand. His staff will provide deliverance and display Yahweh's power. So this is sort of the culminating event of the Passover, the salvation of the Passover. But this depiction here of crossing through the sea, so Yahweh splitting apart the sea and his people walking through it. It's hard to find a more historically significant event not just for the history of what it accomplishes, right, in the history, but the deep symbolism of this whole experience gets built into the fabric of the way Israel's story gets told from here on out. So there is a huge historical meaning to the crossing of the sea, and that also develops and provides a deep symbolic meaning for later biblical authors of salvation and judgment happening through the sea, through the waters. And so the crossing of the sea itself will turn into a huge biblical metaphor that's going to take on a lot of, it's going to be used by a lot of later biblical authors, and it will be a hugely important symbolic event, even though it's building on an important historical event. You understand both levels are at work here. This story itself is actually sort of not just building on, but literally almost replaying the biblical creation story, right? So there in the Genesis story of creation, you have God separating waters to bring forth dry land. Well, the point of that was so that humanity could be planted on the dry land, could have a place to inhabit. So here, the dry land emerges because God has separated waters, and the purpose is that Israel would have a place to cross over, would have a place to inhabit. And then you have an additional layer, and there's a whole lot more we could say about that. But all that to say that when you see Israel going across on dry land, it should remind you, it would echo in the mind of a biblical reader, it would echo God is providing life for his people, because that's when he created the earth. That's what he was doing there. He's providing a place for life for his people so that he could dwell with them. So something similar is going on here. But interestingly then, in the story of Genesis, the waters themselves, these sort of cosmic, pre-cosmic chaos waters, they become a picture of the state of life, or sort of unlife, right? Anti-life. It's an anti-life chaos state of being that God controls to bring forth life. The way the story reads forward from there is where you end up is the flood, where God will undo that separation, and all the waters will then be reunited and cover up all the dry land. So in the story of Noah, you have a sort of uncreation that's going on there. God himself is sort of undoing. He's turning the cosmic order back into the chaos waters that you saw before he brought the dry land through by separating the waters in Genesis 1. So there's this whole sort of motif that develops of God creating, God uncreating, and the state and condition of the waters in relation to the dry land is sort of the way you want to read that. You can tell what's going on by what's going on with the waters. And like, think of the Noah story. When does the dry land appear, and what does that signify? So Noah's out. He's literally saved through the water, but the waters are an agent of judgment for every other form of life. The story kind of ends when Noah again sees dry land and can walk out onto dry land. So this theme of the chaos waters, and then the cosmic ordering of, by separating the waters, God provides dry land for his people. That's a major motif that the Exodus story and the crossing of the sea is actually already building on. It's just showing you another version of that. So in other words, think of this as not just Israel's salvation from Egypt, but it is literally a new creation narrative. If you see the thread that it's already picking up on, the reemergence of dry land, the dividing of waters from waters. This is not just a way of saying Israel is being delivered from Egypt as sort of national salvation. It is also a narrative of new creation. And that's going to help understand why later, when biblical authors refer back to this event in the sort of metaphorical use that they take and give it, they're not just using it as a theme of deliverance. What needs to happen is not just salvation. They're looking at it as a means of new creation. We need God to create something new. And indeed, that's the way it will get picked up and used actually in the New Testament as well, but we probably won't get to that today. But see 1 Corinthians 10, where Paul talks about the passing through the cloud and through the sea. And he's using this basically as a way of incorporating believers, Gentile believers, into the story of Israel. And he uses it as a sort of metaphor for, again, of new birth. So there's a lot of resonance to this, a lot of different ways we could take this conversation, but you'll want to just keep that basic stock imagery in mind. Isaiah 51, quick reference here, Isaiah 51 and verse 9, Isaiah picks it up this way. The Psalms use this language a lot. Isaiah uses it probably more than anybody outside of the Psalms. But here's just one example, Isaiah 51 and verse 9. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in days of old, the generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces, who pierced the dragon? Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a way for the redeemed to pass over? And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So this is Isaiah's sort of recapitulating the metaphor. And notice again, there's a reference here to the arm of the Lord. He's calling on the arm of the Lord to deliver them. That's language from Exodus over and over again. The arm of Yahweh, sometimes the hand of, in fact, more frequently, it's the hand that's mentioned here, but you see a connection. Rahab in Isaiah's poetic language is a reference to Egypt. You cut Egypt in pieces, which if you cast yourself back in the Exodus story, the thing that is cut in pieces is the sea. But in the prophetic imagination, the sea is a symbol of Egypt itself, right? Because they're still in the boundary lines of Egyptian dominion. And so the splitting of the sea, the separating of the waters, is sort of a display against Egypt and Pharaoh themselves. Egypt is going to just be rendered asunder so that God's people not only get to leave, but it's a way of God declaring victory. Like it's almost as if he's using a metaphorical sword to pierce. That's the language of Isaiah. You pierce the dragon. Egypt is this chaos monster in Isaiah's conceptualization of it. Pharaoh being the representative of this monstrous evil, and God's people will be delivered through God doing combat with them. So the parting of the sea is it's certainly not just a natural process that occurs with extraordinarily good timing and allows God's people to go across, but it's not only just a supernatural intervention so that God's people can be delivered. It is also a sort of cosmic conflict narrative being unfolded in the story before us. And this is a way for God's people, all that to say, it's a way that God's people would look at these stories and not just derive meaning from them, but they would cast themselves into these stories and say, this is a way that we can derive hope. We can call on the Lord to replay this story, to bring us a new creation, to offer us, to do conflict, to do battle, and to engage in conflict with our enemies in a way that will provide deliverance for us. And so there's a real beauty to the poetry here, but I think there's a lot of value in taking these stories, the history, the metaphor, and seeing the symbols in ways that help us to understand it's a way for God's people to cast themselves into the story and to be near to God in a similar way. He was there to do this supernatural act of creation and new creation. We can read ourselves into this story in the same sorts of ways and find similar meaning. So obviously a lot more we could say about that, but there's just this beautiful consistency and coherence to the way the whole biblical story unfolds, and these sort of stock biblical images, waters, and dry land, and God separating and piercing. These kinds of things become images that we can use the metaphor to place ourselves in the story. And there's a lot of value to that. It helps us to see where we are now, where we might be going, where we hope to go, and in a time of fear and anxiety and uncertainty, to see that this story has been told before and God showed up, right? Now that's probably oversimplifying it. There's a lot more we can do with the interpretation here. But just on a base fundamental level, there's a real hope and encouragement to that. So many more elements to this story we looked at, and I was struck by. I don't want to comment on all of them. Again, hopefully you did the reading and were able to browse through some of the commentary that I provided throughout the week. It'll be really important as we go forward in these weeks. The less time we have that we normally enjoy, a lot of time in person for deep dive Bible study, the less time we have for that. And it's really hard to do in these videos. Just the nature of video is we have attention span problems and we have time constraints, and it's hard to produce that much in terms of a real deep dive examination. So the less we're able to do that, the more I hope you will take the opportunities throughout the week to take the sections, the portions of reading that we can share together, that we can come in your email inbox every day, and then the little bit of commentary I can provide, and really try to dig into it on your own. And then as we come around here, we just want to summarize the main themes and kind of look at some of the things that have struck us. Now, I'm hoping we can find ways to interact with the text and with each other and share ideas and thoughts and questions and prayer requests more and more throughout the week, even though we have to do it sort of virtually and from a distance, and we can't do it in person. So, but as we unfold that and look for ways to make that more feasible, it's going to be important that you engage with the text yourself. And then we just come together here and discuss the brief little bits that we can sort of gain exhortation from. So one of the things I did point out, and we'll just mention here, I won't explicate in any detail, but as you look through the whole story, this goes back to actually chapter 13, but definitely in chapter 14 you see this, is this connection of this sort of merging together of Yahweh himself, who is present with Israel as they leave Egypt and cross the sea. But the language of Yahweh present with them gets merged together with the not just the pillar of cloud and fire, but also the angel of Yahweh. There's this strange merging together of these three. They're not quite just manifestations of Yahweh, but you see Yahweh himself in the story. But he's described as being with them in these distinct representations. But it's not explained. The distinction is not explained, right? They're merged. He's merged in these three representations, but they also remain distinct. So you have, for instance, in Exodus 13:21, the Lord went before them, and he went before them in the pillar of cloud. It's just, that's the way the story kind of gets set up. Then by the time you get to chapter 14, in verse 19, it is the angel of God who is going before them. It's identical language. It was said about Yahweh, but now there's this angel about whom the same thing is said, and when the pillar of cloud and fire move, the angel seems to be moving as if to say the angel is in the pillar. But we were just told it was Yahweh who was in the pillar. And it's this bizarre sort of blending together of identities. The identities are distinct, right? We might talk about them as distinct persons or personages, but they don't seem to be different entities. They seem to be merged together in their identity. And then chapter 14, verse 24. In the morning watch, the Lord, Yahweh, in the pillar of fire and cloud, looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic. There's this interesting, not segmenting off, but there is this sense you get if you just read the story that Yahweh is there in his presence with the people. The visible representation of this seems to be the pillar, right? And it's alternately a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, whether it's day or nighttime. But it's what we call the glory cloud. In Judaism, we call it it's called the Shekinah, the Shekinah. common way of referring to it, even though that's not in the text. That's just the way we refer to this, the Shekinah. This glory cloud seems to be where Yahweh is visibly represented. But the text doesn't ever really distinguishes, but it doesn't explain to you when you're supposed to understand Yahweh himself is visible in the glory cloud, and when the angel of God, the angel of the Lord, is being referred to. It doesn't stop to explain that. It just refers to one and then it refers to the other. And that just leads to a really interesting little setup that if you're looking at this just from a Hebrew Bible perspective, you've already got this mysterious merging of distinct identities, but that are presented as a unity. So you have a plural unity just carrying Israel through the story here, just from the perspective of the Hebrew Bible examination of it. Now, obviously, if you look at it from a New Testament perspective, you might change the way you describe this, right? So in other words, we might use language here of not just a plural unity, but you might see one, and I referenced Isaiah 63, I believe, in the part as part of the reading and commentary for the week. You might see here a triune expression of Yahweh's identity. He is in the pillar, he is in the angel, and he is there in his presence in some undefined way. So you might see three persons in one entity, or you might see a triunity. That might sound like a Christian conceptualization of something that Judaism didn't have in their thinking. But if you're just reading the Hebrew Bible, it's not that crazy to think. When you look at Yahweh's presence, you look at the pillar and you look at the angel, there is a merging together of identities that are distinct but still united. It's a sort of not composite unity, but a plural unity. So it's not purely a Christian Gentile invention to say, this is how Yahweh revealed himself. This is an Old Testament concept. It's not explained and it's not detailed out. There's nothing like as explicit as the Christian doctrine of the Trinity here. But the Christian doctrine of the Trinity is not in the New Testament either. What you do have is the Bible explaining or presenting the story in both Old and New Testament of God's identity being plurally revealed, being revealed as a plurality in distinct persons, but also as being oneness, a unity. So we should probably be careful about the language. You don't want to overread this stuff, but it's mysterious and fascinating that this is the sort of seminal story of Israel's birth as a nation. And the presence of God among them is seen not as a singularity, right, but as a plural oneness. And so there's a lot more we could say about this. I just thought it was something worth pointing out as you read through the story. That could sound confusing. It's certainly mysterious. I guess it could be confusing, but again, from a New Testament perspective, the New Testament authors are comfortable with this sort of mystery, this sort of merging of identities between Jesus, his Spirit, and the Father. There's a bit of that here, although I admit it's not so clear, but it is one of those details you look at, and the more you ponder, you realize there's a lot to ponder here. It doesn't explicate it clearly, but it's really worth thinking about. So that's Yahweh and the pillar and the angel. There's a lot more, even in the Old Testament, we could build and do with this. I just wanted to point it up. We talked a little bit about Moses' leadership in this moment, and that really did strike me. I don't want to dwell on it here because I wrote quite a bit about it in the commentary, but it is striking that in a time of crisis and a sort of populist backlash from the people, you'll notice there that when the people complain to Moses, that's all that they do. It's not a well thought out strategy that they disagree with Moses because they have a better idea. They just don't like the situation they're in. And so the first thing they think to do, sort of reflexively, is complain to leadership. And I don't want to get too contemporary on this, but it's interesting. Like, this is a real common thread. It's just human nature. We look to leadership to guide us in times of crisis, But when we don't like the way things are going, the default response is just blame the leadership. Well, sometimes that's warranted. It's important to hold people accountable if they're in positions of leadership. But complaining that things are bad is not holding the leadership accountable. It's just complaining that things are bad. And that's precisely what they do. That's all that they do. It would have been better if we died in Egypt. There's a lot of graves back there. You brought us out here just to die. At least then we were more comfortable, right? We told you this, which is not even clear that they ever did. In the text, that we don't read anything about. They told Moses this would be a bad idea. There's nothing in the text that tells us they actually said that ahead of time. But post facto, after they can see things unraveling, or to their appearances things are unraveling, even though they can't see that God's plan is totally working out, all they can think to do is complain and then sort of backfill their complaint by saying, yeah, we knew this would happen, right? And so Moses is confronted with a sort of populist backlash. Not a constructive one, just one that says, we knew we were right and you were wrong, yet here we are, we followed you anyway. And it just strikes me as, yeah, there's something that I think we can learn from our populist age right now, our populist moment, where you have a lot of people complaining about a lot of leadership decisions. And trust me, I'm sympathetic to that. It speaks to our moment and to human nature that when things go bad, we tend to want to look to someone to blame, and the guy out in front is the easy target. But there is a way to hold leadership accountable. That's one thing. This, just pointing out that things are bad and you're the leader, that's not the same thing. That's something else entirely. That's the easier, more lazy version of just populist complaint. I think we have a lot of that. So I think it's worth pointing out of the text that this is human nature. This is not unique to Israel. This is not something that we are immune from. It's just something that we do by nature of the fact that we're human. I do think Moses' response is really quite an example of something we can learn from. That when things get bad, when the plan doesn't seem to be working, when it seems to, in fact, to be totally ill-conceived, like this is a terrible move for a military commander. Drive your people right up to a big, huge body of water, and then when you turn your back to the body of water, because you can't just get across there, and here comes an invading army, you're stuck. It's literally a death cul-de-sac, and you're stuck. And when that is made clear, like it's pretty natural that the first thing you do is just complain that this whole plan is falling apart. Moses' faith to just say, Yahweh has brought us here, he will be the one to fight for us, is remarkable. It's a remarkable faith. It's a remarkable expression of his trust that if Yahweh brought us here, Yahweh will get us through it. If the Lord wants us here for reasons we can't quite discern, he must have a plan to get us through it. That's remarkable in and of itself, just as an expression of faith on Moses' part. But then his leadership, to actually tell the people, be still, be calm, and to not take the populist, the sort of vox populi and the loudest expressions of discontent and say, yeah, you know what, guys, we really need to find a better solution here. Let's put our heads together, to just tell them it's a time for calm. We don't know. We don't have a strategy. We don't know what the plan is. But we know God has brought us this far for a purpose. So we're going to have to trust that he'll bring us through. For Moses to say that out loud in the face of this really stressful outcry, nobody in leadership wants to be in a position where their own people, the people that look to them to lead, are now telling them, we're not sure this was a great idea. We think we should make other plans. We need a better strategy. In fact, they're not even saying that. They're just griping that this is a bad plan. But nobody in leadership likes to hear that. Everyone who sets themselves forward to lead people wants to do it with the approval of the people that have signed up to follow and say, we want to lead, we want you to lead, and we will follow. People in that position want the approval of the people that look to them for guidance, for wisdom, for advice. It takes tremendous moral courage and inner fortitude to listen to voices like that in a time of crisis and chaos and say, we need to wait. There's nothing to be done just yet. So I really was struck by Moses' composure, his courage, his fortitude, his calm, just to in the face of all this say, let's wait for Yahweh to do what the Lord said he's going to do. Struck me as a remarkable example of leadership in a time of crisis. And maybe it struck me that way mostly because we're in a time of crisis and we lack leadership. But I take a great lesson out of that sometimes leaders don't have the answer for how we're going to get out of this. And it is still the right answer to say, we need to be calm and measured and wait and see how the Lord brings us out of this. See how the Lord tells us we're going to get out of this, but he hasn't told us yet. So I found a tremendous comfort and challenge in Moses' example in this sort of chaotic moment. And so he brings the people through, and it's interesting when you get to Exodus 15, the way that the book has been edited and constructed together. Exodus 15 is this really wonderful psalm. It's a hymn of victory. It's typically referred to as the Song of Moses. In Judaism, it's, I think, more commonly referred to as the Song of the Sea. But this song is a hymn of victory. Again, a lot of the motif that's just played out is not just the deliverance of God's people, but it is the victory of Yahweh as king, as a divine warrior king who has achieved conquest over his enemy. So what comes out is not just a declaration of redemptive victory. It is a battle hymn, or a sort of victory hymn after the battle. And this is pretty common in the ancient world. You have this in Ugaritic texts and other, like there's a Canaanite version of this, which actually seems to mirror the Song of the Sea here, where there's a song, the Canaanites sing a song to Baal because he has achieved victory over the sea. But the sea here is, in the Canaanite mythology, it's Baal's victory over Yam. Yam is the Hebrew word for sea. It's also a deity, a Canaanite deity. So you have a sort of version of that going on here, only this is not simply mythology. It is history having played out according to the way the pagan mythologies they would mythologize this stuff. Here you have a historical victory that then gets expressed in a similar way, in similar language to what the pagans would use in their mythology. So it's fascinating unto itself. But what I want to highlight here is the fact that a tremendous historical victory takes place for God's people. And then right after that, what comes, sort of reflexively, sort of naturally, what the people, what the story pieces together for us is a song. It's really hard to overstate the importance of the role of music in Israel's history of worship, and then this carries into the church in the New Testament. Music provides a way for God's people to sets a biblical pattern where music becomes a means of expression in corporate prayer, things that it just doesn't suffice to come through periods of victory and then pray personally, privately, thank you, God, for doing this. Right? That's necessary, it's important, but it's not sufficient. And this sort of corporate prayer, this put to song, is a way of not just uniting God's people in the victory, because song can do that, music can do that in a way that just talking about things can't. But it is a way of expressing it sort of poetically. It's putting history and theology to rhythm, giving it a poetic expression that, for one thing, just practically speaking, for a corporate body gathered together, it's easier to pray, to sing or chant through these types of things in a way that is sometimes not easy to do if you're just trying to pray, right? If you're just trying to say the words out loud. There's something sort of dry, and it can be tough to actually do that together. But singing it together is I don't know, there's something much more powerful to that. It gives rhythm to it. It gives us a sense of cohesion in a way that just, let's get done with this event and talk about how cool it was. There's something, it's hard to overstate the importance of song in worship. And you see this as a pretty good example of it. This is like a seminal moment of an expression of corporate unity and in declaring thanksgiving to God for his victory. But it's important here that it's done through song, and when you read Miriam's role in this, dance, which again, deeply uncomfortable for me and just kind of weird for our culture. But you see this throughout the biblical story, whether it's Jephthah's daughter, whether it's David and Saul coming back from victory, the women going out to dance and beating the drums, or whatever they are, the timbrels, tambourines they're called. I think they're more like a hand drum. This is something that happens over and over again. And it's important to know that songs of victory like this help bring God's people together. And something about putting it to music particularly, it speaks our prayers out loud to God in a way that resonate more with the soul than with the mind. And there's something about that is a thread that carries through the Hebrew Scriptures, the book of Psalms, most of all, but not just there, that I think is worth pointing out. Now, this type of psalm of victory, this victory hymn, is not the only type of corporate singing that becomes important for God's people. There's value here in looking at this, that in a situation like one we're in now, where we're like waiting for the deliverance, we're all sort of in the moment of, how are we going to come through this? When are we going to come through this? Where are we, and what exactly are we supposed to do now? There's a sense where it's helpful on one hand to have a victory song like this, because we can sort of load it up and get it ready, right? Because when we do come through and we're able to get back together and worship in person, man, I suspect singing is going to be important for us. It's one thing that, right, we can learn on camera. We can all tune in virtually together with the use of technology and do that. You can't really sing together that way, right? So I thank God we're able to still learn together and go through the scriptures. That's important. But man, I think I even miss singing. I'm a terrible singer, and I'm not big on, I'm not the most expressive in my worship, corporately or privately. But even I am now missing the corporate song that we share together, and we just can't do it this way. So I suspect when we do come through this, when we are able to gather together again, man, singing is going to be a really important part of that. So to have this song of victory right here before us, there's something about that that's actually really heartening. On the other hand, how do you sing a song of victory before you've achieved the victory, when you're still waiting to see the deliverance of the Lord? Well, then what do you sing? And that would lead to, this is not something I'm going to go into in depth here, but that would lead to also something that is so deeply important in the Hebrew Scriptures. You read the Psalms, and I think scholars have worked out that, like, by the numbers, something like at least a third, or around a third, of the Psalms in the Hebrew Scriptures are what they call lament psalms, psalms of lament, psalms of lamentation. Jeremiah writes a whole book of lamentation, right? We have it right after Jeremiah, and lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem. You have an entire lament song expressed in the midst of that calamity. But you have this all over the place in the book of Psalms. So there are songs of victory, But there are also songs of lament, and they're equally important for God's people to embody. The problem is that when you read through the Psalms, you have these expressions of grief, corporate and personal. You have these outcries to God, protests against what's happening to us. And they're prayers to God, protesting, you've allowed this to happen. When are you going to show up? And it's all over the place in the Psalms. You have imprecations, imprecatory Psalms, where it's not just, this is bad that this is happening to me, but Lord, we want you to come and vindicate yourself on these enemies and crush them. We're uncomfortable with that. The church is just, for whatever reason, that we're put off by that. We structure our corporate singing around singing songs of victory, and almost exclusively songs of victory. And I think that's a mistake. We need to incorporate the tradition of lament. We need to incorporate the proper song at the proper time. And right now you can say, I'm thankful for this victory song, because I think we can be prepared for when we do get to gather together again. I suspect there should be a major expression of victory and a proclamation of thanksgiving at that time, and we'll do it in song. I think that's going to be beautiful. But I think for the time being, we also need to learn how to embody in our own devotional lives. And again, when we get back together, and to the extent that we're able to now, we need to learn to embody the tradition of lamentation, of grief, of properly grieving, of protesting things that are wrong, and not being afraid to express that to God. You have this long tradition. It is victory and singing songs of thanksgiving, but equally important is singing out our protests, lamenting things out loud, and we should never be afraid of that or ashamed of it. It's an important part of also something that unifies God's people together and sort of gives us a means of expressing ourselves to Him in prayer. And I think we have given that short shrift in the church because we're afraid to say these things out loud. But David was not. The Hebrew Bible gives us plenty of room to run in this type of corporate lamentation of expressing grief. And so we need to get better at that. This strikes me as a particularly good time, a time of trial, a time of testing, to give expression to some of that anxiety and just incorporate it into your prayer life. You have permission to do that from the scriptures. And then we will balance it with victory songs when the victory has appeared. So now it's always the case that we have occasion for both, right? We're always in the middle of both trials and victory. It's just the nature of walking with the Lord. He's already provided us such tremendous victory that every day we can sing a victory song. So there's no doubt that that's always appropriate. But corporately, there's some situations where we don't quite feel the victory is ours yet. And that's fine. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's coming. When it does, I think it gives all the more joy to our corporate proclamation of victory. We sing together about it. But in the time of trial, it's okay to grieve. It's okay to express the anxiety. Just say it out loud and give it to Yahweh, give it to the Lord, and He'll be there. He hears it, right? He'll answer. And there's a sort of encouragement that comes with that, even in the middle of, you see this in the Psalms, oftentimes they will start off as lament psalms, but then David will seem to work himself up to an expression of thanksgiving. And it's remarkable how often that happens, and give that a chance to happen. So in the course of this song, where we'll close this thing up, is as the song unfolds, and we won't go into any detail here, but you read through it, it's a beautiful expression. It's filled with deep theology and this tremendous poetic language. But where it starts to wind up is bringing us to the expression of God has not only achieved victory, He is not only the divine warrior who has defeated the enemy. When you get to Exodus 15 and verse 17, you will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain. This really properly should be sung, but nobody wants me to do that here. Maybe I could chant it, but that wouldn't work either. But you will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain. The place, O Lord, which you have made for your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. And verse 18, there the Lord will reign forever and ever. This is the sort of Hebrew Bible version of Jesus, what Jesus taught us to pray, the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is a call for God's kingdom to be established on earth. The Song of Victory is declaring Yahweh's victory over the pagan gods of Egypt, but it leads to his enthronement as king from his holy mountain, whether that holy mountain here is meant to be Mount Sinai, Jerusalem, Mount Zion in the temple, or whether it's forecasting forward to the tabernacle, which will function like a mountain in the midst of the wilderness. It's not the point. It's all three of those. Those three are all conceptually linked, because wherever God's presence is, and we can be planted with him on that mountain, that is a place, that's the place of his abode. That's the place of his sanctuary. That is the place where he rules as king, right? Our worship should be geared toward who can ascend to the mountain of the Lord. We come together, we sing. We are, as we sing and offer him the praise of our lips. This is like the sacrifices being burned on the altar. We are ascending up the holy mountain with him. We are ascending up into his presence. We are being elevated up into the holy mountain of God. Why do we want to be there? Because that's where he's reigning from as king. If he is up there as king in his heavenly abode, and we are being planted there with him, this is the declaration of victory. We have this sort of spiritual reality in place through the prayers and ascent that we're privileged to take part in, even before he has established his kingdom on earth to rule from Jerusalem. So it doesn't matter if the reference here is to the temple in Jerusalem, or to Mount Sinai, or to the tabernacle in the wilderness. You have debate about this among scholars all the time. Well, what mountain is being talked about here? It doesn't matter. The point is, it's the place of God's presence, and we are planted there. That's the purpose here. So Moses gives us this song. It may well be that Miriam actually wrote the song. I'm not sure. Scholars debate that too. But Miriam comes out and starts dancing, and there's some question about whether the song is sung by Moses and then Miriam and her girls are responding antiphonally, like they're singing it back and forth to each other, which strikes me as actually really cool. But I couldn't prove that that's what's happening, but it seems possible, because she comes out and dances, and they sing the same song. It's just not all recorded when Miriam sings it. Or whether Miriam herself wrote the song, and it's just called the Song of Moses because he was the leader. But in any case, this expression of song and prayer to God and thanksgiving for his victory, it's just a proclamation of his victory, really. It's not just that he's brought them out of Egypt. It ends with the culminating experience that God will be enthroned as king over all the earth, and we will be planted there with him. In this regard, in the historical setting, it's an expression of faith as much as it is a thanksgiving for what just happened. It's an expression that they trust what's going to happen when God's kingdom comes to earth, as much as it is remembering what just did happen. This is the nature of worship. It's hard, especially corporately, to worship in a time of crisis and trial and upheaval that we're in now. It's just hard. There are things we're supposed to be doing corporately that we can't do corporately. And there's no substitute for it. I can get you teaching on the internet. We can email, we can do a lot of things to maintain our discipleship, our walks with the Lord. We cannot corporately worship together the way we're supposed to. We just can't do it right now. The best we can do is take the principles that come out of stories like this and try to take them to heart and embody them and live them out in our own families, in our own homes, as a stopgap measure until we can do it together in person as a church properly the way we're supposed to be doing it. But a stopgap measure can be quite powerful if it's done with the right heart. So hopefully there's some lessons built into here about corporate worship and about remembering what God has done for us and looking ahead to what's going to be when he does the next thing. And take these things as much as you're able to in your individual walk with the Lord at a time when almost all we have is our individual walk with the Lord. And then cultivate that. Build on those principles. Take these lessons. Make them real in your own daily walk with the Lord and your own expressions of worship. And what that should do is strengthen the body in our corporate worship when we are able to get back together. There's a cyclical nature to this. We gather and assemble in corporate worship so that each of us can be strengthened for our individual walks with the Lord. But there is a flip side to that, where we're all supposed to be individually strengthening our own walk with the Lord so that when we gather together corporately, we are contributing to each other in the body life of our worship and our walk with the Lord. For right now, all we have is the individual. But there's no reason you can't take that and build it out, strengthen it, develop it. We need to try to do everything we can to stay united and to maintain some corporate worship and corporate discipleship in this time, but we're not going to be able to do it properly the way we should. It's up to each of us to build what we can individually and in our own homes, in our own families, and we should, by God's grace, when we're able to come together corporately again, we should see results from that, because we'll all be so bursting, ready to give what we have accumulated for ourselves in our own individual walks, that the body will be strengthened by it. So I look forward to that, and I realize that I'm issuing that both as an encouragement and a challenge, that I think we need to be challenged with this. Please continue to, as much as you can, take these portions and do the reading. If you don't want to read my commentary, fine, but do the reading of the text. Sit down with the Bible open and read and pray through what these stories are telling us. Read these beautiful Psalms. Read the sections that tell us how God's people responded to these types of things in the past, and take whatever lessons you can from them. The more we're in the text in our own individual daily lives, the better we will weather this storm. So that's my encouragement for you today. And yes, it's a challenge, but we really need to rise up to meet this challenge. So moving on from that, let me just close us out here with some housekeeping stuff. Please continue to be on the lookout for people whom the church can help, whether it's financial, whether they need pastoral help. I'm still working full time, so I'm out of the house all the time. I'm not confined to home because I'm basically only in my truck or outside all the time. I don't have to be. I can still make trips to visit people. If you need something like that, just let me know. Email, call, go on the Facebook page and post a message there. One way or another, we'll get you help. Financial help, pastoral help, just practical help, any and everything. We want to be able to reach out. So if you are part of the church and you know someone who needs help, please get us that information. If you're up against some financial struggles, you've had to stay home from work, please let the church know. We will help out any way we can. So I want everyone to be as united as possible. One way we can do that is to just maintain our witness. And one of the ways we want to do that is just helping people who need help in a difficult time. And we know they're out there, but we have to know where they are to be able to reach out to them. So please, I'm issuing it as a particular appeal to our church family to be on the lookout for people whom we can help. And if you want to take it on yourself, I encourage you to do that. But please, by all means, let the church know. Let us know, and we'll help wherever we can. Other than that, please continue to do your Bible reading as much as you can. Let me know if any questions come up. If you just have thoughts that come to you and you want to share them, by all means, send me those emails. Give me phone calls or texts. They're all welcome. Meantime, we will keep putting out commentary and Bible reading each week through your email account. If you don't have those yet, if you're not getting them, let me know. We'll get them to you if you want to get on the list. The text prayer chain is up and running, and that's been useful. That's been important. If you're not on that and you want to be, let us know that too. We'll get you on it. If you need anything, let us know. I'll just have to leave it at that. I'm going to keep saying this as we keep going in deeper and deeper into this sort of shutdown. Keep looking out for each other. Phone calls are still possible, right? The old-fashioned phone call will really go a long way. So guys, please keep calling each other. If you need me, call me. Let us know what we can do, and let's all be looking for ways to serve the Lord and reach out as his witnesses during this time. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. We'll see you next time.